Hey leaders, in this episode of Leading Collaborative Response, I'm joined by Zoe Serediuk. Did I say that right, Zoe?
Yes, you
Hey,
did.
awesome. And Ankush Garg. Did I get that right, Ankush? Awesome. They're the administrative team at Ron Southern School with the Calgary Board of Education. This is a special episode because we are going to explore one element of collaborative response, the collaborative team meeting, in depth, and how Ron Southern has introduced this structure into their school with a really high degree of intentionality and fidelity. So let's get started.
Are you a leader who is navigating the nuances of leading collaborative response in your school or district? Are you unsure of what collaborative response is? Are you looking to understand the critical role leadership plays when establishing and refining a collaborative response approach?
Collaborative response began as a grassroots approach to focus on the needs of students through a framework of collaboration. That approach has grown to a movement that is training leadership and education.
Through the Leading Collaborative Response podcast, Kurtis and I share our own experiences of leading collaborative response and lessons learned as we continue to learn and gain insight through the experiences of working alongside others. We also have the opportunity to engage in conversations with school and divisional leaders implementing the framework in their own organizations.
We know great leaders build great teams because that is what every child deserves. Subscribe to the Leading Collaborative Response podcast and join the thousands of schools seeing success for students through intentional and focused collaborative efforts. Welcome to Leading Collaborative Response. As always, I'm Kurtis Hewson, co-founder and lead learner of Jigsaw Learning, and super excited to be joined today by Zoe and Ankush, the leadership team at Ron Southern. So before we jump into the learning a little bit more about you and the school, I have to share that I had a chance to join your school back in April and was really impressed in engaging in conversations with you, with the staff team, and then observing the amount of fidelity and intentionality that you had put in place of really introducing that collaborative team meeting with real purpose and focus. So before we get into exploring that, love for you to share a little bit of your educational journey and what's brought you to Ron Southern, where you're at now. Zoe, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been with the Calgary board for many, many, many years. I've been a principal for about 15 years. So always in elementary. And I've also been a French immersion principal, which was a neat experience. And then I also have worked in the area supporting a director in Area 4 and supporting schools, high schools, junior highs, and elementaries, and then moved into leadership and learning where we supported new leaders. And so I do have my doctorate in educational leadership. And so I really enjoyed those experiences. And I think they really helped me grow as a leader. And then I just really miss being in a school. And I wanted to take all those great things that I learned from these other experiences and then go back and apply them in a school setting. So that's how I ended up here at Ron Southern.
Awesome. And how about for you, Ankush?
So I'm relatively new, I guess, with the CBE. Been here for 10 years. I say I've kind of had the Benjamin Button experience of education because I did my practicum in high school, and then I moved into a science specialist in grade 9, and then did some system work supporting complementary curriculum, and then became an elementary generalist before moving into an assistant principal role.
So you're basically telling us that you're going to finish your career teaching preschool.
Probably, yeah. Or nursery, I don't know.
I'd like to see that.
Yeah, and then I was just drawn, Zoe and I overlapped while I was downtown, and I was just drawn by her mentorship, and that's why I applied here, and that's what brought me here. All
right, so as we go forward, please, either one jump in at any point, but give us a little bit more background about Ron Southern, size of school, your grade levels, and just a little bit of the demographic context for our listeners.
So Ron Southern's a fascinating school. It's been open now for 7 years. I didn't open it. It was another principal that was here for 3 years, and then I took over in the 4th year of Ron Southern. So it is completely changed in demographics and size than when it first opened. So it's very much mirroring what's happening in our system in terms of increased enrollment all through the year. So we're currently, it's a K-6 school. It is now, I think, 515. I always hesitate because we literally have new students coming in like every day or every week.
That day I was there, that was exact thing was happening as well.
Yeah, so I love that because it makes it like such an awesome school. It's the demographics have really changed as well. So that has presented as a challenge for us because we didn't have a ton of experience with English language learners that were like LP1s and LP2s. And that was new for us to kind of work around and building their capacity and also making children feel welcome because they're coming in at all different times during the year. And so just we're working on creating that sense of belonging with the school. So when kids are from different countries or speak different languages, and then they're landing at Ron Southern, you know, whenever, February, March, April, and kind of helping to create that sense of belonging for them, because that can be challenging. Ankush, what do you want to add? Oh, we have 2 ES classes.
Yeah.
I forgot that. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, I was gonna, like, along that line, I think it's been consistent in Ron Southern, but it's just become bigger, is the diversity at our school. And so, yeah, we have the 2 system classes, enhanced educational supports, which is fantastic as a resource, but also I think as a connection point for our students. And yeah, I think Zoe and I were looking at the data a few weeks ago, and we have over 50 home countries for our students and over 45 languages that are that's primary languages spoken. So just the diversity is something that we're very, I think it defines our school. Yeah.
Well, when we think about, how a school collaboratively responds to needs, I mean, that's just, you're living that day to day of how are we constantly responding, and no one person can do this with the diversity that you have within your school. Outstanding. So, although we know that collaborative response is more than just a meeting, I was really, really blown away by the intentionality that you as a school had put into really taking the time to understand and then implement that particular structure with Fidelity. So I'm going to start just right at the basics. If you were to describe that meeting to someone unfamiliar with it, how does it, in your mind, differ from a traditional meeting where we're coming together to talk about kids? How would you go about defining or describing that collaborative team meeting to someone who may be unfamiliar?
I can start with maybe not describing like the exact what, but more what it feels like.
Yeah, sure. That's great.
And I think in our teacher feedback, one teacher mentioned this, comparing what the difference between the SLT and the collaborative response is. And she felt in the SLT.
Sorry, I'm just going to jump in for those that might not be familiar. Our SLT being school learning team, where we're focusing in on responding to the need of a student.
Yeah. And so she shared that in an SLT meeting, there's almost a feeling of judgment. Like, why haven't you done this? Why haven't you done this? Why haven't you done this? Which is not my intention at all when I'm running those, but that feeling does come across. Versus in a collaborative response, it's more, I think they expressed, it was more brainstorming, collaborative, invigorating, because you're exploring possibilities and you're just looking at what can be done, as opposed to, I think, maybe even the structure of the SLT, where you're trying to get area support. You're looking at, okay, what have you done? Just so that you can kind of make the case that you need that support. So that difference in feeling really changes, I think, how teachers come into it and what they're leaving with.
And I think one of the big things with collaborative response is I like that. For me, it's not all about the story of the child, because even in SLTs, we find we get very caught up in the story and why something won't work because, and then it becomes all integrated into a story. And so when they're coming, it's just, with everybody has a key issue, right? And so we're all on the same level. Whereas in SLT, when they come in, they're sitting there and we have learning leaders there, myself, maybe another teacher that works with the kid. But it is just, it doesn't feel like Ankush was saying that everybody's on the same level. Where I think collaborative response, it's structured, and we'd like to think we run structured SLTs, but they do go like every which direction.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
I think that's hard in collaborative response for that to happen. Like if you do and follow the protocols, then it's a cleaner meeting and it's a tighter meeting. And I think walk away. And one thing we learned from collaborative response that we started putting right away into the SLT is sometimes you don't realize the mistakes you make, right? But like we gave the teachers too many ideas. And I think they went back and didn't know what to try, or they try something and wouldn't work, and
just feeling overwhelmed with
and so
I'm going to implement all of this.
Revisiting when you're only needing to try one strategy, what you think might be, is a lot more doable for teachers and for us to even kind of track if we're making an impact or not. So yeah, I just think it's tighter, cleaner, it's more collaborative. And I think everybody learns from everyone. And like, I love that part when you have a key issue, usually everyone else, when you're not talking about the kiddo, everyone else is like, oh yeah, I can relate to that because I have something similar in the classroom that happens to me as well. And I just think it really does bring in the expertise of all of us. We're all equal. And I love that.
Absolutely.
Just want to add one more thing. I think the big difference also between the SLT and the cloud response is a shift from, the words I'll use is accountability to ownership. Right? So like in accountability, even when I'm running it, it feels like, okay, how am I going to make it look like we've been accountable to all the things we were supposed to do to get that area support? Versus even the ideas that are generated, it's the teachers say, oh, I like that. And they own that because they have full ownership of that.
Right.
And then that's, I think, the real strength of it.
Well, we often talk about this idea of when you're implementing, well, any framework or school reform change, but especially with collaborative response, go slow. Understand the process, and it's through these little mini steps that we take that we make overall impact long term. And I think that your school really exemplified that idea of, if we're going to do this and do it well, we want to really understand and implement with fidelity. So can you walk us through how you went about introducing, because it wasn't a one staff meeting, hey, we're going to start doing this, and then everybody next week, let's all jump in. That's really funny. Intentional.
It was, but we made a mistake at first, and then we talked about it, and then we rejigged, because I think.
Okay, love to hear that.
Yeah, so I think it was one staff meeting. It was after we had gone to your first year meeting, and the LL, Suzanne Smith, and I came back, and we were excited, and we're like, okay, we need to talk to staff. I put it on a staff meeting agenda with a bunch of other items, maybe not smart. So we went through, and I was just, hey, just want to tell you, we're gonna, this is one of the things we're going to kind of get involved in this year. And I was super excited about it. And I was talking to him, and I said, you guys, it's going to be great. And then I'm like, when you sense in a room, and I'm like, I'm not sensing the same excitement I have. And so they looked worried and they looked scared. And I think a couple teachers that were like, well, what is that? And I'm like, don't worry, we're going to, take step by step. So don't worry. But they were. And then I remember going back to, because I'm not sure if you were at that meeting. I think maybe it was Suzanne and I.
Yeah, and it was in December during report,
No, we first did a little bit before that. And so I was like, oh, I think we didn't quite do that justice. And so we waited actually a bit, because I'm like, I don't think it's the right time. So
so the timing
Yeah,
complexity and really
and it was too much, and we had a couple other things that they were not used to, and it was too much. And so we waited a bit, and then I said to Ankush and Suzanne, I'm like, we need to be really strategic and little tiny steps. So then I think we went in and we showed the videos. And then we also, Ankush found a video, or maybe it was from you guys, where we showed a good meeting, and then, the business meeting, it's kind of funny, like where they go everywhere on it. And yeah, I said, well, what you know about the difference? And we had a discussion and things like that. And then they seemed more curious about it. And then we had some teachers that have actually had experience with collaborative response from other schools. So we had them speak to it and their own experience. And that was really, and at that time, they knew their colleagues better than they did earlier in the year.
Right.
Because early in the year, like because we're growing so much, we always have new staff. And so they hadn't bonded yet. And so when they heard some of their colleagues that they started really working with say, this was really neat, and we did this at this school and blah, 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 then they were getting more curious. And then
almost that social proof from your colleagues that kind of goes, okay, I can put some energy into trying to understand this.
Yeah. And they presented it very well, the people that we had to speak. And we also had dabbled the year before with our area strategist in him modeling the collaborative response with some of our neurodivergent. Was it neuro? Yeah, it was, which normally that's not collaborative response, right? Because they are tier 3, tier 4 kids. But anyway, he modeled using that, and they had a really amazing experience with it. And so they also spoke to it as being really positive, and they really liked the collaboration piece to it. So then our staff started getting more curious.
So if I were to almost synthesize that a little bit, the idea of the first rollout, you hadn't really established some of that critical mass and didn't quite have the traction. But like from what you're describing there, it's kind of building some of that critical mass, colleagues that have engaged in this, some that had tried it, so that there's that group that's within the staff team able to say, this is going to be valuable, rather than just, this is what we're going to do. Hooray.
Yeah, it's bringing it up at the right time.
Yeah.
And I think that I didn't think about that at the beginning of the year, right? You forget that everyone's overwhelmed about everything. So being strategic. And then I think we talked, Ankush and I and Suzanne, around where do we start, right? In terms of, because we're looking at all the stuff from all the meetings you guys gave, and we actually were like, we're doing a good, strong job in our SDP and our math and our literacy, but we actually could not get the momentum in well-being. Like, it just wasn't happening for us. So do you want to talk a bit about that? Because
well, before I talk about that, I want to go back a little bit earlier. I think in addition to what Zoe said, I think part of it was also us understanding what exactly is this, right? And like part of my learning happens by trying. And so, Zoe mentioned the year before we had that strategist. I reached out to him and like, I don't understand this. Like, can you help me understand this? And then we brainstormed and we're like, we have this thing that I just couldn't get a handle of with our neurodivergent students. He said, let's run some. And I was like, okay, let me get some like teachers that I know would be like, are my early adapters, are very open to new things. So we did that. And it took a couple tries to really kind of feel the pulse of it, understand the impact, and also build like Zoe and I's ability to be like, okay, this is what we need to do when leading it to build efficiency in it. And then we went through that whole journey with our staff that Zoe shared. And then when we hit that wellness, we were like, okay, we saw collaborative response as something, because I think part of it also is we don't have all the expertise individually for it. And we thought, okay, like this is with our changing demographic, changing populations, all of that, how do we address this? And how do we build capacity around it? And we saw, I think in our earlier prototypes, really that the way we structured it, we added one little tweak from what you guys did, which was break the cause of the key issues and then brainstorm in each of those causes. And we found that super valuable in this context. And that really pushed our practice, tried novel strategies, because we can look at that list and be like, yeah, we tried this, we tried this, we tried this. And a lot of times we're not making that impact that we're looking for. So we thought, okay, here's wellness. It's big. Our data is not going in the direction we want it to. And so let's try this, because it had a positive impact with the group that we did. From the teachers that came in, they also shared positive feedback. And it seemed like something that it's in us working together as opposed to you should be doing this, that I shared.
Yeah.
And so it landed well. We committed to doing it once a month. And we were, in our wellness goal, we were really focused on students treating each other with respect and treating each other well. And so we really wanted to build the SEL skills, so social emotional learning. And so we started with something simple. We just asked teachers, what's a key issue that you're wanting to address through this? What SEL does it fall under? And then we grouped teachers according to common key issues, just to get like, our thinking was, we want teachers to feel that this is addressing something that they're wanting.
Right.
Instead of,
use.
yeah. And so through those common topics, once a month we hit it, but because it was common and we're taking the student out of the equation, we felt that everyone would have something that they could take away with, and it would be a worthwhile use of their time. And also because of that timing, an efficient use of their time to address it.
And I want to leverage, we also wanted to leverage one other thing through collaborative response, which probably wouldn't be something maybe that you would think of, but for us, we actually thought it was a really great opportunity to develop the leadership with our learning leaders, because we had, how many groups? 4 groups from our staff. And so Ankush did some really good modeling in a couple of meetings just with the admin team, so that we could learn the facilitation. And then it allowed our learning leaders to be able to have that leadership opportunity to lead a group as well. So it didn't just come down on 2 or 3, like we got to include a bigger group and develop their leadership and expertise as well. So I thought that was a little, not something you expect as a benefit, but another benefit from doing the meetings.
Yeah. So I want to unpack a couple of things there that I think are really important for us. The first is, we always talk with that collaborative response is, there's some schools that may not start with a overarching focus, just to get used to the process. But we always say, try and get that you're not just meeting to meet. It's what's the overarching theme, and then in time, even better, what is a school priority that we are trying to impact through these particular meetings. And so I really love how you've said one of our SDP, our school development plan priorities, was well-being, and we're going to use this mechanism to really gain some traction in that area, which I think is super, super valuable for people to take away. Then I'm going to ask you to break down a little bit further that root cause, because when I was in there that day and you shared and I'll share with our audience, it was even with a little bit of trepidation of, we made a little change to your format. And once you saw it, went, oh my goodness, this is brilliant of what you did. We usually talk about, okay, in the collaborative team meeting, bring a student in mind and determine what's a key issue. We don't need to hear the story. We want to have it concise. What's one thing we want to do? And then we'd say, all right, attach other students, and then let's brainstorm around the key issue. Take the students out of the conversation and just focus on the key issue. Brainstorm, and then come back to say, all right, teacher A, for your student, what's one thing you want to try? Teacher B. But I loved how you took one more step in there and said, we have a key issue related to wellness, and then we break it into 3 potential root causes, understanding that the key issue might be what we're observing. You think of the iceberg, that might be the tip, but what might be going on underneath. Can you describe that a little bit further? And if you're able to, even give us an example of what that might look like. Because Ankush, that day, you had even said, by the time you get to the third root cause, that's typically where some really interesting, innovative thinking starts to happen. So can you describe that a little more in depth? We'll be right back to continue this episode. I often hear leaders remark that collaborative time is established for teams in their schools, but they are looking for ways to ensure that time is meaningful and focused. Often, the first reaction is a perceived need to be consistently present to help provide leadership and support. However, when effectively established, focus for the time can be accomplished without the need for a leader to micromanage or devalue the professionalism of those around the table. Join me for the online workshop, Creating Focus for Collaborative Planning Without Micromanaging Your Teams, part of our Supporting Collaborative Response series. This on-demand workshop, I will share why focus for collaborative planning is critical and how it can be accomplished without a leader needing to be consistently setting the agenda or needing to be consistently involved. Purchase the workshop and you'll also have the ability to replay all or any portion of the workshop as you wish. I will also be sharing numerous resources, templates, and samples to help support your team planning. Register today to learn more about this critical collaborative structure integral within a school's collaborative response. And now back to our conversation.
Yeah, I think, when I looked at it and when I was introduced, so I want to give credit to our strategist because he's the one that had it in there.
Yeah.
But I really saw elements of design thinking in there. And as my role as a specialist, that was one of the things I led. And I see it as like really defining the problem. Even in our system work, we go to what's the root cause of something, right? And so an example was we had a student that was getting dysregulated, that's on the spectrum. And so you could be like, okay, how do I address the dysregulation? But if you don't know what's causing that dysregulation, you're just kind of throwing darts, right?
Yeah.
And so, we looked at that root cause. We were like, is it sensory? Is it communicate, not being engaged? And each one of those will have very different responses of what you do.
And the beauty of that too is I might have a student who's dysregulated, but I'm pretty sure it's in relation to communication. And you might have one where you're seeing it as more sensory so that we can have that overarching conversation without going, yeah, but let me tell you more about Osmond because you really need to know this kid deeper.
And I think it really, especially when you're dealing with the well-being piece, it's really important that you frame things in that way to dig deeper, because sometimes like we all just see the behavior and make assumptions. And I think it challenges when you dig, it challenges assumptions. And you actually have to really think of what is that child trying to tell us through that behavior. And I think that right away gets people to think differently.
Yeah. And then even when we ask teachers, what could we do? I try to push for at least 3 different things for each of those issues.
Right.
Because usually the first one, maybe the second one, are things that we've just been ingrained throughout our professional journey that, oh yeah, okay, if it's sensory, give them a headphone or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Which may or may not work. But that third one, then we're really pushing those creative juices. And so then you get a really, like, you got tried and true strategies, and then you have strategies that maybe we didn't think of, or that
possibilities,
are
really.
Possibilities,
outside the box.
And I found it really interesting. I think majority of the time, teachers really like those third choices.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, and I think those third choices are really addressing the root cause, right? Because we're like, okay, give them a headphone, all right, whatever. But that third one, you're thinking really deeply about what can I do to meet that student's need, not just like block it, right? And they're very successful. Like, we've gotten a lot of teachers being like, oh, I tried that, it was amazing, it was really helped. And then it turned into, like you said, I think in what you shared with us, good for some, but
Yeah, intended for one, good for all.
Yeah,
that's what the wording is.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so then they're like, oh, I tried it with this kid, I tried it with this kid, and like the enthusiasm just continues.
Well, and I really think too, like when you're thinking about modeling and then practicing thinking strategies, essentially, you're almost through that meeting construct, helping for us so that when we're not in meetings, maybe I'm adopting that same kind of mindset of, I'm frustrated at the end of the day, this has happened, but it might force me to do that little bit. Okay, what do I think the root cause might be? What could I attend to? Like you're kind of practicing that within a group setting that should have impact culturally when we're not in meetings, if you know what I'm saying with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that long term I don't think we've seen it yet, have we?
No, I wouldn't say
Yeah.
yet, but I think we will.
Yeah.
And I wish I would have looked back in my meeting notes, because I had a really good example, and I can't quite remember it, Kurtis, of it was a really outside the box solution, like thing to try, a strategy to try with a kid with a lot of anxiety and some negative self-talk. And apprehension, and one of our teachers suggested, so it wasn't that typical thing, and I just can't think of it, but it was a thing that worked. And when she came back and we circled back with celebrations, the teacher was like, I can't believe it, because I have tried different things the entire year to get this child to like not be like so negative with themselves before they even start something, and it worked, and it was such a simple thing, and I can't remember what it was.
Yeah.
But that's so reinforcing for the staff team, and wow, it'd be even better if in the meeting Ankush has shared this idea strategy, I come back and go, oh my goodness, that was amazing, thank you so much. Well, what kind of affirmation does that help to build on your entire staff team then as well?
Actually, I want to take back what I just said.
Okay.
Because I was just thinking, we got the teachers to reflect on the value of the collaborative response on a key issue and why it was successful. And some of the things that they shared really showed a shift in how they were thinking about students and the way they were approaching it.
Oh, awesome.
So like a specific example was, instead of trying to correct the behavior, they were thinking about what the student was looking for, which was attention, both positive or negative, and then shifting their thinking into, okay, how do I give more of that positive attention as an example, right? So they, the relationship between them and the student and how they were seeing the student was shifting in their reflection, which I think wouldn't be just a one-off.
So let's go right into the weeds then, in regards to in your school, how do you schedule those meetings? When do they happen? How are they involved? You alluded to already that, we kind of create groups based on the themes that come up, but share with us so that somebody watching or listening to this could get a good sense of who's involved when, what does it specifically look like for Raw and Southern?
It started very simple. So I want to really start. It was tiny steps, right? So I think it was in January, we collected the data around the SELs, and then we committed to do a collaborative response model meeting once a month during our Friday afternoons. We have our professional learning and team planning.
Early dismissal within.
Early dismissal. So once a month on the early dismissals, we have a collaborative response meeting. And so that's what we have done. And I think we did three, and then we did some SLT ones as well.
Yeah, and
that was extra.
It was
I'll let you
mixed
talk
grades.
Yeah.
So really, we wanted to break up the grade teams and also have a variety of experiences that could facilitate that conversation.
So I think I heard you say before, would this be correct that when you have those days that you had on Fridays, would it be 4 teams?
Yes.
Essentially?
Yeah.
So how many staff would be in each one-ish?
5 to 6.
Yeah.
5 to 6 plus an
No.
admin or
No,
learning lead.
guys. Yeah,
No, 6 total.
6 total.
6 total. Okay, which includes an administrator, one of the two of you in one of those groups, and a learning lead in one of those groups. Have I
Yeah,
got-
like two of our learning leaders led them, and then Ankush led one and I led one.
Right, so
And
four
we kept
total.
the same groups, like we didn't mix it with like this first year, like we started with a commonality in the key issues, but they weren't the exact same, right? But they were
Right.
a commonality in the theme and the SELs, and we each had a group and they were, like.
Okay, so
mixed. Yeah.
the way you've done it then is, for me as a teacher, I'm in Zoe's group and it's the same people for each one of the times, just so we can get used to process,
Yeah.
develop some trust and
Feel
vulnerability.
comfortable.
Even though I might be teaching grade 3 and there's a grade 2 teacher, there's a
Grade
1,
six.
6.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then
Perfect.
from the data that we collected from the teachers about their key issues, Zoe and I sat down and said, which one of these should we
Mhm.
pull out that would be more universal and would be a good one to choose? So
Yeah.
then we picked the teacher that was going to bring the key issue for each of the 4 groups.
Right.
We let them know that please bring your student forward at this meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they
excellent.
were prepared. And then we, I know you thought it was funny that we only did one key issue and the
Oh,
main.
not funny. I think it's
And I was like,
strategic,
"You
get
can do
good at
more than
one.
Okay, but like we did, yeah, the one key issue and then what that person brought forward. And then we would ask, does anyone can think of a student this would apply to or not? And then everyone that felt that key issue could apply to a student they had, then they would commit to actions and stuff. And if they didn't, that was okay. So now we're ready to take on like being even more efficient. I think we were pretty efficient at it, but we always just focused like on a teeny step of one person, and then the next
Yeah.
meeting somebody else, and then the next meeting somebody else in each of our little groups.
Perfect. Well, and this
Yeah.
aligns to right where I started this off of, just the intentionality and fidelity of the process. Is we're going to really get good with the process before, we add some next steps along. So that's where I want to go next is, as you're planning into next year, what are some potential next steps or continued refinements that you're thinking at this point?
Well, it's funny because when you came and you went over that jigsaw thing, all we saw was the team meeting.
Yeah.
Right. And we're like,
Yeah.
that's why it's called Jigsaw. And
Yeah. Light went off.
we reduced your whole book into that meeting. And we're like, this is it.
We'll be right back to continue this episode.
Feeling overwhelmed with the expectations being placed on teachers, leaders, and educational systems to respond to the diverse needs of our learners?
Are you wanting to take your PLCs and RTI efforts to the next level?
It definitely takes a highly coordinated framework of structures and processes to maximize the collective capacity of your team to ensure success for all students. Collaborative Response is that framework.
Order your copy of our bestseller, Collaborative Response, 3 foundational components that transform how we respond to the needs of learners, which includes access to a comprehensive companion website. Join the thousands of schools using the framework to ensure high levels of success for students and staff. And now back to our conversation.
So I think one of the things that, like, when you came and the feedback you gave has really pushed us in thinking about those other puzzle pieces and how do they fit and how do they connect. And I think it was almost perfect timing on your part when you came, because we are faced with that challenge of a bigger school, more complexities coming into our school, that we had to rethink how we were doing what we were doing before.
Yeah.
And I think one of the shifts that we were thinking about is really thinking about the tiers of support.
Yeah.
And what do we do to support each of those tiers? How are we addressing it? Because it can't just fall all on the shoulders of a few people.
Yeah.
And so, we do class reviews, and we've made some changes to those class reviews to kind of be more intentional in what level of support does this student need to be successful, and then tie that into how we're going to achieve that support, right? So if it is a tier 2, we haven't thought of exactly how we're doing it, but I think we're going to look at more collaborative response and putting it so that we don't need an admin, but it is more great team or group-based to address that. Yeah, so it's early stages, but looking at really that tier 2 support using the collaborative response to address those needs.
Awesome.
And I would say a couple of things. I think Ankush has already changed his style in how he does SLTs. I think the one little thing we took away at the beginning, which was very tiny, but it has been very effective in our SLTs, was we did give way too many strategies for teachers. And then I'm sure they had no idea what to do when they walked away from those meetings. And so we fine-tuned that one little piece of the SLT into what is the one strategy that you're going to go try with this student that's, you know, fairly complex, like maybe a tier 3 or even a 4. That you can try and do instead of giving them 10 ideas. So we refined, and even how you kind of run the meeting, I think is a lot more based on the collaborative response. Like, so that has changed. And then another step we wanted to do, because I remember you and I had a discussion, because the continuum of supports. And I think I challenged you a bit on it, and it was like, I don't get it. I don't like, because we did that drill down, a lot of creativity came from that, right? And so I said, well, what's stopping everyone from just going and looking on the sheet and pulling a strategy? And then when you so eloquently explained it, it made a whole lot of sense. And then when I thought back to our last meeting, my group, we did get stuck on one of the key issues and possible strategies. Like we kind of got stuck as a group. And then I was like, oh, okay, now I get this. And so I think what we're going to do in those first 3 days back is we are going to start the process of creating a continuum of supports for those tier 1, 2 kids around the SELs. I haven't totally got the vision, but we thought that'd be a really good thing to do to add to our meetings. That's our goal next year, to have a continuum of supports for probably the SELs. That the teachers can refer and we can keep adding to as we come with more ideas. So
And Zoe,
that's a big step for us.
You're really speaking to what, like, sometimes we'll have schools that will engage in understanding what is collaborative response. They'll see that continuum and go, oh, cool, I'm going to do that with my staff next week. Where we kind of say, no, step back, start the meeting structures, begin with, because eventually you want that people do exactly what you experienced of, we've hit a plateau, or the idea generation's not there. Then wouldn't it be great if we had a toolbox that we could refer to in those situations that could be constantly growing and refining over time? So again, it's that real intentional and thoughtful rollout, which I think is so, so important.
Yeah, and I would add, well, I'm going to build on what Zoe said, and then I have another point. I liked how you also framed, like, the tier 1s are, what are the non-negotiables at your school?
I like that.
Right, so that I think helped us frame and not make it this exhaustive list that teachers just get overwhelmed with, or you don't know where to start with. But it's like, what do we want to see in every classroom to address whatever the topic is for that. So I think that really helped frame how to personalize it to our school instead of make it a general document. In terms of next year too, one of the things that I think this whole journey has made me think more of is, how do things talk to each other more, right? So, you know, Zoe was talking about the SLTs. I'm even seeing the collaborative response forming the basis of those notes for the SLTs. So it's not like we need a whole meeting and have to rehash everything. It's like almost an SLT of like, okay, let's look at our notes from the collaborative response. What have we done? What hasn't worked or what is working? And then what do we need from the area that we can't do from the school? Or like, I even think of like, I don't know if this is your stuff, or I saw it in one of our CBE documents, like 3A and 3B. So supports from the school, right? Like the 2 is the classroom supports, 3A is the supports from the school, and then 3B is from the system.
Yeah.
So, you know, even the SLT might start with, okay, here's everything you've done. What is it that we can do at the school level, like with EAs, or if we have an intervention teacher or whatever, to support that? And if that doesn't work, then we go to the system.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's trying to build upon those tiers of, let's try and reflect on what have we done before we try and move to that next tier of support, because as you move up, those supports become finite, and let's be honest, they cost resources for us. So there is one question we always like asking our guests, and I'll put it out, and whoever has a response, you can start, and then I'll pose it to the next person as well. We love asking this question of, in the spirit of, if you knew then what you know now, what advice would you have given your past self in relation to the collaborative team meeting?
I think for me personally, I would have started engaged in it sooner, because quite honestly, I think I went to 3 times the initial meetings when it was really, really open, and I listened to it and I was like, it seems good, but I don't know, like what we're doing is working well, and meeting our students. So I regret that. I wish we would have gone into it sooner. I wish I would have taken that step sooner as a leader, instead of waiting.
Well, and it kind of goes with what Ankush was saying of learning by doing, in a sense.
Right. Yeah. And I think I got caught up when I first about all the jigsaw, and I was just like, whoa, like that's just so much.
Yeah, it's overwhelming to see it all.
Yeah. And then I think when I revisited it, I was like, okay, where's our starting point? And it doesn't mean that we can't keep doing some of the stuff that's working well. And it took me a little bit to get to that. So I wish I would have gotten there sooner. And then maybe how I first brought it to the staff, I wish I would have done what I did in December in like early October, right? Because then I had to back off for a bit just to get everybody like not feeling like it was something, just another thing. And so then we had to tweak the approach. So if I initially would have done that, maybe we would have done a few more meetings this year, and being a little bit farther ahead in the work.
Yeah, makes sense. So how about for you, Ankush?
I think the biggest thing that I wish I knew when I started was how the tiered supports kind of work and are connected. I think when we started with our tier 3 or the kids that needed tier 3 and 4 support. Like there were some of our students that had bigger needs, and we were not sure what to do, and we saw this as the entry point, as not an entry point, I think as something else to try, because we weren't, and we're like, what do we got to lose? But I think we were lucky because it did have an impact on those kids, but it could have easily failed because we could have just hit these roadblocks because they're so complex. And so by really focusing on those like the students that are the kids that kind of get forgotten almost in the middle.
I heard somebody today refer to them as our cusp kids, the kids on the cusp. Yeah. They're close.
Yeah. We use colors, and I didn't want to use the colors and stuff like that. Those kids, I think that's where you have more impact. You're able to move the dial, and I think it seems smaller, but I think cumulatively it has a bigger effect in the whole school. And so I think even in the way we would have introduced it to staff, we had a good buy-in, but I think the buy-in would have been slightly different and more.
We could have developed their understanding better. I think that's what I would say, because I don't think we had a perfect understanding either. And
Mhm.
so that's maybe what I would do. They're pretty enthusiastic little group of teachers for the most part. And I think I don't think exactly what Ankush was saying, that we had a deep enough understanding. And I think now if we were to both go as leaders to different schools and start collaborative response, there would be definite tweaks in our own leadership that would assist our teachers in being more grounded and understanding it beyond showing the videos. And
Yeah. Well, and this definitely reflects that whole idea of this. It's a learning process
yeah.
as you're working through, and you're learning as not only staff and leaders, but as an organization through this process.
Mhm.
So with that, I want to say thank you so much for taking some time, being able to share and just reflect upon your learning and understanding through this as well. So much appreciation for you to take the time to join here for us. Thank you so much, Zoe and Ankush.
Thanks, Kurtis.
Yeah, thank you for your support.
Yeah, we appreciate that. It was awesome.
Awesome. Take care, and we will chat again soon.
Thanks.
Join us again to continue to build your own capacity and leading collaborative response in your context.